this meeting is called to order. Please rise for the flag pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, approval of agenda.
Motion to approve.
Louis made the
Second.
motion to approve and Jordan seconded it. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Agenda approved. Approval of minutes, April 20th, 2023.
Motion to approve the minutes. Second.
Jordan made the motion to approve and Louis seconded it. Any discussion or anything else in there? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes approved. Updates. We're changing this around a little. You're up, Jordan.
We just had a single variance today for Philip and Rebecca Schumacher, who needed a variance to build a septic system 2 feet from their property or line rather than 10 feet. And we approved that.
Okay, is that down in Dakota then or down?
That was not, it was actually on Knollwood Lane. Be like around the side of the country club over there.
Oh, okay.
So it's Wilson Township, but
Okay. All righty. Marcia.
We had the two petitions that the planning commission approved and the county board approved them with no changes. That was the Anthony Wurst and Leslie Ladowig. They went through just like the planning commission had recommended.
And that's all you want to say about that?
You want me to say so? The dog breeding, it will be back on the table at some point in time. Talking with staff, it won't be until the District 3 commissioner is, we have representation elected. I said elected and sworn in so that they are in a very official capacity. And also, you know, we don't have a planning director. So Ms. Holte, our administrator, would like to have a planning director in place too before we go on that adventure again.
Okay.
Stuff, so.
Thank you. Okay, old business. Okay, you got to pay attention to this docket number because it's PC 042122, which means it's over a year old, 03. Eric, would you like to, it's for replacement of a dwelling within Agriculture Resource Conservation District, Shoreland Natural Feature Overlay District, and the Floodplain Overland District.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, as Mark called this out, this petition is table one that has been on old business since April of last year. And, you know, hopefully everybody's had a chance to review the rather large packet that corresponds with this, both the past one from last year as well as the new information. And I guess I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes just to update where we are currently with this. The board may recall Okay, if the board may recall last year after the public hearing, they tabled it with direction to the applicants that they needed to approach state and federal agencies with their technical data and I guess come to more consensus of where they stand. Since that time, they've submitted a number of, I'd say, highly technical data that is both hydro and engineered in nature. And they had several times, I think, taken that to the Minnesota DNR for consideration. As you see in the packet, that information outlines their attempt and some of the points that they wanted to argue. And since then, now, we received a new packet that essentially the applicant has had a number of consultants assist with that data. And we have now received a response in the last week from the Minnesota DNR and their legal person. That's the most recent information in there. I think tonight we do have the applicant that would like to address the Planning Commission. And we also have a representative from the Minnesota DNR that can also add or answer any questions that you might have on that front. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over unless there's any immediate questions that the Planning Commission has.
Eric, since I wasn't here a year ago, can you hit a couple of high points so that I can somehow get,
Sure. The original conditional use permit was to allow a building site on less than 40. In this case, the applicants wish to create a seasonable cottage or dwelling for recreational purposes. And also it was to recognize that it was in shoreland and also in floodplain. And the main point is the designation of the floodplain. The county has ability to issue conditional use permits or zoning permits for things that are considered in the flood fringe, which is, I'd say, a manageable portion of the floodplain. The discussion or the disagreement is that it's currently mapped floodway, and that the technical data, the technical information that the applicant has not been essentially recognized or approved by the Minnesota DNR as flood fringe. They are still claiming that it's floodway, therefore it's not eligible for county to issue a conditional use permit or to issue any type of construction or zoning permit when it carries that floodway designation. So that's really the crutch of the issue.
okay. Thank you.
I had a general question too, Eric.
Sure.
So it sounds like the state was remapping flood zones. I actually had personal experience with in-laws about that. And that has been a development or more recent.
Yeah, the map in question is still from 1984. However, I think the Corps of Engineers has done updates on the upper Mississippi, that area. I think in 2001, 2002, we were put on notice that the floodplain maps were going to be updated for Winona County. Well, in 2023, we're still on notice that, in the next year or two, we may go through public hearings, and we would be part of that as the Planning Commission to accept the new data. There is preliminary data out there for new floodplain. So yeah, that's been ongoing for a number of years.
Is that public information or?
Yes, I believe it is.
With the recent high water on the Mississippi River, how did the property fit there?
The peak of the flood day, I think it was like April 24th. I did visit a number of sites up and down the river just to take a look because we had issued some permits, and I kind of visited some sites that had been recently completed, and they fared very well. This site in question, obviously the water was up, the sand area where the house would be was still considerably above water. The access to it was somewhat underwater, but I did take some pictures too. I do have that saved and share should that question come up too.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
You've been putting the new and the old floodplain on a lot of ours over the last couple of years. Does it change the flood fringe and the flood in this one, the new? The old?
I don't believe so, not to a point where it'd make a substantial difference.
Any other questions for Eric?
Do you have pictures of it?
Right, keep in mind, they're from the railroad tracks, are quite a distance, and they were starting to get full tree canopy leaf coverage, so they were shots from a distance.
So this has been a parcel that's been recognized by Winona County. And has it been recognized by Winona County Taxing Authority? Have we been collecting property taxes on this parcel?
Yes, and part of,
From an individual owner, not the DNR.
correct. Yeah, what, it's called the Hot Fish Shop Ponds because the historic use of it was the commercial raising of fish. There was a series of ponds that were connected by, I believe, the Kolowski family who owned the Hot Fish Shop there on the east end of Winona. And this was one of their properties that they used to supply some of the fish that they used in the restaurant. It also did have a seasonable mobile home there for that use too. And so it did have a power in a mobile home, and it's been historically used in that manner. But yes, has been a parcel that's been recognized as I think 26 some acres.
Question I have is if there was a mobile home there, why can't we put another one there?
Partly about the timing of maybe, the history on the mobile home and the history of the sand is well documented now in your packet. There's a year by year photo that shows aerial photography. That's all part of this application.
Any other questions for Eric? Okay, I have a question for Stephanie. We're not having a public hearing or anything, correct? We already had the public hearing? So,
Yeah, I guess. So we would, the public hearing's already been had. I think you can get any updated information from the petitioner or DNR if you wish to. I think since they did submit some additional information, if you have questions on that, that would be appropriate.
so them are the only three people that can talk, Eric, the applicant, and the DNR,
And me if you want.
and you?
Yeah, don't forget me.
Thank you.
Unless there's somebody that you really want to hear from, we don't normally recommend calling anyone up during if you're not at public hearing. But if you do have specific questions for someone else, that wouldn't be out of order.
Okay, thank you. Okay. You're up.
Well, I'm sorry, procedure, was this tabled? So does it need taken off the table?
It does.
Okay.
Motion to take it off the table.
I'll second it.
Louis made the motion to take it off the table and Gene seconded it. All in favor of taking it off the table, say aye.
Aye.
It is officially off the table. We should have done that before Eric spoke, apparently, but
That's okay.
I thought calling it old business was good enough. All right, now you're up. Promise.
What would you like to know? I guess I'll give you a short dissertation.
First thing I want to know is the other day at high water mark, which was April 20, whatever, your building site was how far above the water?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, name and address, please.
My name is Douglas Stanton. My address is 30323 Wildlife Haven Road, Winona, Minnesota.
Question is, on high water day, do you have any idea how far the water was?
The location of the desired dwelling,
Yes. I mean, you know, if
27 feet higher than the water.
27 feet higher than the water. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, speak.
So 1 year ago, I came here to request a seasonal dwelling at what we call the Hot Fish Shop Ponds, being I've grown up there since 1961, which is located near Trempealeau or Twin Bluffs Bar, down by where County Road 3 comes down to the bottom of the hill from Nodine. I purchased the fish shop ponds from Matthew. Thought it would be neat, being that I drove past that place my whole life, to have a cabin down there. So hence Eric tells me I need a conditional use because it's less than 40 acres. I said, not a problem, let's do it. And then 2 hours before this conditional use, DNR had a comment. Justifiably so, this board asked that I go find more information. And every conversation that we have had, a different issue or hurdle has come up. So I hired Jeff Griffin with G Cubed to do hydrology work, which is humorous to me if this is in a floodway. Because prior, if you're worried about flooding people on the contiguous piece of land, that there are 7 more dwellings toward the spillway that is contiguous with this land. And Winona County has allowed homes and additions for the last 25 years. If in fact it is in a floodway, using Mr. Youngsma's definition of floodway, which is the best definition I've heard in my entire life of verbatim, let me put it to you this way, it is like a highway. You have 2 travel corridor lanes, that is floodway. Flood fringe is the shoulder. If we were truly in floodway, even though maps aren't well defined, before placing 400,000 cubic yards of sand to slow water down, don't you think hydrology work should have been done maybe then? So anyway, you asked me, go get more information. That's exactly what I've done. I provided every piece of information in here. Now, 2 days ago, we get another letter that says, well, even though we call this sand permanent and for reuse, beneficial reuse, which beneficial reuse could be for me. The one thing that caught my ear in the minutes last year was the fact that the DNR said they had a lease on that land. And it made absolutely no sense in my head why the DNR, who is simply issuing a permit to the Corps of Engineers for sand placement, of which their historical documents show that it wasn't wetlands high enough to put sand on, why they would call this a floodway. And so I asked him, I said, why do you have a lease? The intent at one time was that was a holding place card. Hence the sand was designated permanent on the site because their intent was to fill in all the ponds and create a recreational area with boat landings, but had public opposition nor could find the funding. So the statute has this whole pee and match started was you can't import fill to establish an elevation in a lowlands area to create a dwelling. Well, whether or not you're coming from the ground and going up 10 feet to create an elevation to put a recreational home on, or you're filling a 10-foot deep pond up to 0, you're still you're importing fill, hence the need for a permanent site of sand so that somebody can move that sand around and it can stay there without violating the statute. So now, questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have a copy of their lease?
If we request a copy of the lease, I suppose, I don't know.
I mean,
It was in the minutes of the first meeting.
all I'm saying is if you see a copy of the lease, it'd be interesting to,
Yeah, might be. No, I do not have to answer the question. I don't.
do they have a copy? Okay.
So how can they lease it to someone else and you own it and build a recreational facility on there?
That was before my time.
Gotcha.
When did you buy this parcel?
1 year ago,
1 year.
roughly.
Do you happen to know when Matthew acquired it?
No, 10 years ago, maybe, when Steve bought it. Because being I grew up on that creek, that first batch of sand come in, then when Winona Excavating went bankrupt, Steve bought it from them guys with the intent to hauling all the sand off. Corps Engineers, Channel Maintenance, called up Matthew. This I know because I owned at time a business in La Crosse and did business with Matthew. The intent was then to take that sand, Core came in, placed additional sand with the intent of utilizing sand. This location is a mirrored image of Homer. Now Homer's got a home site on it, and I was open to a conditional use with conditions, saying, okay, tell you what, I understand a concern by someone allowing me to build a recreational cabin along the river. And I think if that photo packet, you should be able to see some of the decrepit places that are upstream and downstream of me, but willing to do a conditional use with conditions going, okay, I'll tell you what. So we don't have to worry about fire and rescue and everything else. We just won't, you have agree to no overnight dwellings from March 15th to May 31st during the flood season. Nobody else can predict. So the elevation of our proposed, if you look at that photo packet that we sent, is higher than Highway 61. If that cabin goes under, boys and girls, that cabin's the last thing we're going to be worried about. You got shore acres in La Crescent. I don't understand. The big question for me is, what is so special about this piece of ground that it's a no? Because anywhere up and down this, what they've considered flood fringe and where they're building houses in shore acres and in Homer and in it's mind boggling. I don't understand. So any questions?
Picture, Doug? Oh,
Yeah, that's what's snow right there. Goes the holes.
that's what the flood is.
What page are you on?
No, that's winter time.
But even came up,
Page 56.
it's like the second or last picture.
A lot of history.
But this is on the same piece of ground.
It's interesting along that, fish pond thing, you go just to what I would call north, some people call it west. There is a parcel and it said next to Mr. Stanton's, it's owned by the United States. Then you go to another parcel, it's Michael and Jeannie Florin.
Yep.
And then there's another parcel, United States of America. And then it's Ann and Virginia model, so modal or something. So there is some small parcels in between that are owned by the United States of America. But it doesn't say DNR, it doesn't say Corps of Army Engineers. It's registered as a private owner that owns, that property.
So we all own a little bit of it?
Yeah,
Come on down.
we can go down and
Kind of like the cabin.
what did you say, Stephanie?
We also have no ability.
Right.
Exempted from our zoning.
And you can't tax them either.
And there was, when I first bought this, there was a hefty, it was $12,000 a year because it was considered commercial usage. The only reason Matthew sold it is, like I said, it's a mirrored image of Homer. They disallowed the hauling of sand, the railroad did. So now we have, which I understand, I'm not here to be contentious, but the sand is going to sit there for now until the end of time. And the liability that it puts on me, put on Matthew, put on Winona Excavating, maybe not 100% the DNR's fault, absolutely not 100% the DNR's fault, but part of the railroad's fault is, so now I own an island with not only 400,000 cubic yards of sand that was permitted, but an additional 200 upstream of the non-permitted area when Matthew purchased it, because the Corps put additional sand, because they were gonna pull a lot of it out of there. Now what that has done, and I don't know if any of you people go on the river, but that made one big sandbar for a lot of people to play on. And you try to police that, you might as well jump off the cliff. So with at least a dwelling looking straight across the river at like at Trempolo or just above, like Marcia indicated, at Mike Floren's or the next person or the next person, when you have a dwelling there, most people have the respect to go, oh, somebody actually owns this? I ain't gonna be crawling up and over it all day long. Now, if they come and ask you, you care if we play on your sandbar? I could give two hoots.
Are they, the Corps, do they plan on hauling sand in there?
Not anymore, because what they're doing now is because of the railroad, they moved across to Trempolo.
Or on the Wisconsin?
Now they're on the Wisconsin, they can go right straight to Trempolo.
Are they gonna haul any more in Homer?
Yes.
That one's okay.
The barges are sitting, the dredging materials sitting right there.
Asking, do you have an abstract of this property?
I think we do.
Look on it and see if that lease.
Huh? Yeah, but I think there's an I'll have to check with Mike Murphy, my attorney.
I would think it would be.
All I'm saying is, to see if DNR claims they had a lease or whatever, and they didn't record it, they could be out.
Well, I don't know that the lease is necessarily pertinent because it went away. The moral to that whole conversation is the fact that they leased it for a purpose. The purpose is all I can figure out is a placeholder until they purchased and or found funding to do what they desired to do, is utilize imported fill to create an elevation, which is against the statute.
I would think that lease would be null and void once it's stick.
It went away before I even purchased it, and that is immaterial to me because it's gone away. It has nothing to do with the land. The lease is irrelevant. The only part that the lease makes sense on is they wanted to utilize it to do something with it, which back then, if they'd have done it, I'd have been happier than the heck because we don't have boat landings on the Minnesota side. We got one at Homer, which is kind of fake.
Mosquito?
Yeah,
Very small one in Dresbeck.
yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah, question.
Doug.
Yeah.
So I'm pulling up in our county records, this was back in 2018. WTTC Land Management Company LLC. That must be one of Matthew's.
Part of Matthew's deal, I assume.
So I mean, we've had it valued and we've collected, property taxes from them. And then, let's see, that was 18, 19, it's still the same. 20, it's still the same. 21, still the same. 22, then it changes.
So what
Yep.
was Matthew paying for taxes on that at the time? Just curious.
And me
Back
too.
in back in 18, they paid $12,750 worth of taxes.
Okay.
And it says no, I think it said here just, it's land, there's no house.
So I guess the one other point that I think is recognizable is there's been discussions as, well, it was lowland, it was natural waterway, which was a topic for a while, where no substantial tree growth we got trees down there 100 years old. And the one thing, I tried to make one phone call before I got in here tonight, which really makes a ton of sense, is I don't know if any of you have heard of Drussel Well Drilling right here in Winona. Been around since the beginning of time. And David Drussel is a friend of mine, and we went down. Each pond has an 8-inch pressure-fed well to keep those ponds going. So if this wasn't dry land, why did you have to dig a hole? And why did you have to put a well in? Now, I can't attest to that. I tried to get, Earl's dead. Earl's father's dead. David was a half a year old when they put him in the truck and said, you're coming along. So I tried to get a hold of Marion, but she was having supper with guests tonight to see if there was any records in Winona County of them putting the well in, which takes away the argument of natural waterway. Otherwise, you don't have to dig a hole. So,
Are those still going? 'Cause I've seen it.
yeah, yep. If you get enough, if the water table and David's said they've collapsed, and you get rust in them and the whole 9 yards. And if the water table doesn't have near the pressure in it, but it will continually run, especially when the river table comes up, it creates a more greater pressure on that particular water table wherever they terminated. And so if you put all these pieces together, and I don't expect you guys to understand all of this, no, when you get a packet and you go, what the hell? I'm only telling you. But my point is, we've been getting a roadblock through up every other step. And basically now they're saying, well, if you want to create a LOMAR, which we asked if we could do in the beginning, they said, nope, because the maps aren't well defined enough. And then I thought today, well, if they ain't well defined enough and you're worried about flooding people, you should have had the hydrology work before you put the sand there.
Well, if we got no more questions for you, we can listen to the DNR guy, and then if you stick around, we can ask you more questions when he's done. All righty?
All right.
Name and address, please.
Lucas Youngsma, area hydrologist with Minnesota DNR. Office is 1801 South Oak in Lake City. So appreciate the opportunity. Believe in the packet, our legal representative staff attorney Robert Carey had supplied a letter to Stanton's attorney. Our previous two letters were addressed to this commission, to the county. This one is addressed to Mr. Stanton and his attorney, kind of focusing on their arguments. I would like to address Mr. Stanton's, reference to a lease. The Army Corps of Engineers is who had the lease with the site for placement of dredged materials. There was apparently interest, and I do not know details on that, but there had been interest in a potential for a public access at this location, and that inevitably did not go forward. I do not know if DNR had acquired any interest there, but what had been brought up at previous public hearing was the Army Corps of Engineers lease, and DNR in regards to dredge material placement has never had a land interest, just our regulatory jurisdictional interest. So those were things that I'd heard addressed that I want to identify. Otherwise, the letter will speak to itself.
So would
Other questions?
DNR possibly give him a release on all that information?
Absolutely. If
If he requested a letter from the DNR stating, we have no interest in this property at all.
yeah, absolutely. We could certainly, do that, provide that.
Okay, thank you.
Questions, anyone? Lynn?
Well, I'm just trying to kind of figure out the whole process, but it sounds like sometimes the DNR purchases property to put dredge fill on. Sounds like sometimes the DNR requests a permit from the landowner, that they go two different routes.
So for dredge material management for the 9-foot navigation channel, that is all going to be the federal government through the Army Corps of Engineers. The Minnesota DNR does not manage any of the navigation channel. There is occasionally dredging that Minnesota DNR does, in front of public accesses, for example. And almost exclusively, we are hauling that material upland. Whereas the Army Corps of Engineers, with their mission to maintain navigation for commercial uses, they're dealing with such enormous quantities that they are utilizing these dredge material placement sites. And DNR has a permit, has had 2 permits over the course of time. The current permit is 1994-5082, and that authorizes placement at these dredge material sites where material is being placed beginning below the ordinary high water elevation and, building up, throughout the course of time based on the quantity of dredging that the Army Corps of Engineers has undertaken.
DNR is more interested in upland and the Corps of Engineers is more interested in floodway, flood fringe.
And to follow up with what Lynn said, though, so familiar with the Homer site, where Army Corps of Engineers has taken full advantage of stockpiling dredge materials from the river. Now, I believe I think that's a parcel that says United States of America. I think the Army Corps did purchase that from a private party and elected to stockpile dredge materials there. Now, the DNR has no jurisdiction over allowing them to do that at the Homer site?
We have regulatory jurisdiction through our Public Waters Works permitting program, and work with the Army Corps of Engineers on their channel maintenance plan, dredge management maintenance plan, and the DNR's general permit to the Corps for placement of material at those sites. But we have no land interest. The
Corps trump DNR, federal would trump state?
Typically, yes. Within the Clean Water Act, in response to a series of lawsuits, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, answering your question. There was an included section that directed the Corps of Engineers to pursue and receive state permits. So the states of Minnesota, Iowa, Minnesota issue permits for, those particular practices.
So that was a courtesy, in my opinion, that the feds got permission from the state, but then they didn't feel they needed permission from the county, which it's occupied in. And you weren't part of that, but that's still a very...
I understand how that could be.
Yeah. Yeah. I do have a question though, pulling up the tax records, and this is for, because it came because they didn't have 40 acres, correct? That was one of the premises. Now maybe I'm reading it wrong, but all these property descriptions, they say 43.7 AC is 43.87 AC, 43.7 acres. So every tax statement from 18 to 23 has 43.7 acres that he's paying, that they're paying taxes on. This doesn't have to do with the DNR, but they are paying taxes on. So I guess, maybe that's just another little wrinkle that they came because they didn't have 40 acres and it's telling me they're paying taxes on more.
Okay, Deb.
Well, this was, the 2023 was Doug Stanton, but it goes back to the Matthew where it was 43. It's always been description 43.7.
Mr. Chair, it seems like we've gotten into the weeds of leases and dredging and so forth, but isn't the crux of your argument floodway versus flood fringe? Isn't that the issue?
So, and I'll reference back to our letter. We responded to 2 arguments. One is looking at kind of that administrative historical record that the site, from the information we have, originated below the ordinary high water elevation and has been built up over time. And, prohibitions in state statute do not allow for placement of fill in public waters for, development purposes. So that's one one point. And then the second one is absolutely the floodplain issue. And as Eric had indicated, the county is still operating under a current effective map, flood map from 1984, which has this area as a general floodplain, which allows for, the assumption that everything is treated as floodway until, solid information is presented that says, no, this is not. But it also references better available data, which is, the referenced long incoming draft preliminary maps, which do designate a floodway. And this island, again, tying back to the history of this being placed there, has that shown as floodway. And, our floodplain unit is consulted with our legal as well as with FEMA, on that question. And the response is that, in our opinion, this is floodway. And in order to administratively change that, a letter of map revision would be required. One of the requirements of that is that the DNR, the state, sign off on that. And we've identified a concern with being able to do that.
No, a year ago, I just want to follow up on this conversation. A year ago, the location of this recreational dwelling is on a site that via pictures, I believe, and I'll ask Doug later, but this mound has been there over 50 years. If this was truly in a floodway, how could it be allowed to be left there for over 50 years?
And, and that is part of the original, approval. The intent was for that material to be hauled off for beneficial reuse. And there, the issue is getting at, a difference of intent, where it was intended for beneficial reuse. There are some practical issues. Mr. Stanton referenced railroad decisions, but constructing a residence, on top of this is not, one of the uses that was identified in the permit that authorized placement of material at that site.
50 years ago.
Yes.
Okay, it's just a matter of a little bit of what is the definition of permanent. Now, I rounded that off. I think it's longer because I remember when the fish ponds were there back in the 60s. I'm showing my age here a little bit, huh? And I remember the trailer down there too.
Okay.
And at that time, and it was zoned by our county, agricultural, recreational, right?
Still is.
Or it is now.
Still is.
It
That was commercial then.
Yeah, it was taxed.
Well, they were running a commercial fish farm.
Right.
And I assume that was year round and stuff. So, it gets to be difficult to, and I'm trying to ascertain floodplain, floodway, flood fringe, all the little definitions of how that comes in there. And we just had a lot of high water, not record, of course. And I still am looking at this as a seasonal, if I recall your application being seasonal. So you're not looking at it as your year-round residence. But I want to put things in perspective. The map you gave me, a lot of trees growing up in there. So it's pretty long-term. And as we discussed here early, it's hard to go back into the deed and find out leases with Matthew and so forth. My position is, I don't really care about it. historical leases. And as far as dredging, if you wanted to, if the Corps of Engineers wanted to lease land from you, that's your business, you know, to dredge. But to me, it's getting back to the primary reason we're here. Is this a flood way as we're trying to define it? Because a floodplain is, you know, another definition, but truly, if I heard you correctly, if it's a floodway, that mound should have never been there to begin with, at least on a permanent basis. Am I correct?
You know, I would certainly agree that if a new proposal from the Corps of Engineers came in, you know, I do not believe we would have authorized that site for placement because it's in the floodway.
Okay, so that answers my question as far as I was concerned about it, let's put it that way. So I think John had a question.
Looking at the beneficial purposes that the dredge material can be made available for, they all look to me like the things that are going to be removed from the area in question, or at least the original way that it was envisioned was that it would be eventually removed. You know, there's some conflicts here. The Winona County recognizes it as a privately owned piece of land. The DNR claims that, well, there might be a state ownership aspect to it because, you know, it was solely made up of dredge materials. But, you know, so this pile of sand is there, mostly sand, I assume. It doesn't seem to me like we're short on dredge material in the upper Mississippi Valley because the, you know, Army Corps is always dredging and it seems like an endless activity. I'm just wondering if, given the conflict between land ownership and DNR claiming jurisdiction on what happens to this piece of land, couldn't we just look at the dredge material as being irrelevant to beneficial uses for anything? I understand there's a law, there's a statute governing it, but there's just so much dredge material available. Why would anyone uproot, you know, all the trees on this island, exposing it to further erosion back into the river again? It just seems to me like since there is this conflict on ownership, it might be better just to use fresh dredge material for anything that, you know, this piece of land was envisioned for. Does the DNR, do you have any, you know, response to that? You know, once again, I understand that there's you know, legal aspects that might be a little difficult to get past.
Yep, I would say that the majority of the issues that you have just identified are, you know, a practical reality, a cost-effective reality, and given the sheer volume of dredge material that is available elsewhere, and practical issues working with the railroad, that the likelihood of this material being able to be cost effectively removed from this site, you know, are going to be much more difficult than making use of other sources that don't have those practical difficulties. But again, that's, really outside of a regulatory realm, and a business decision made by others. But, again, that does, just because of those practical constraints, considerations, and costs, likely leaves this with a, permanent and, potentially perpetual, large quantity of this placed dredge material.
Given that, sorry,
No, go ahead. You think.
given that, could the DNR just pursue a path to change that regulatory relationship instead of maintaining the same position, which practically speaking may not be of any value?
And I'm trying to quickly reference from our letter, and we do address that. We have a reference to the statute on the bottom of page 3 and top of page 4, where we address that. But, because as we've identified, the location, began below the ordinary high water elevation based off of all of the information from the Great One study that involved the state's Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers. All of that information, supports that this was below the OHW and then built up over the course of time. Then it, still is and was authorized. It still is jurisdictional, and, the prohibition, stands, and my hands are tied with that.
If Winona County does issue a conditional use permit, would the DNR feel obliged because of, not wanting to set a precedent? Would the DNR feel obliged to take it to court?
I would have to defer that question to our attorney.
Oh, yeah.
I apologize for that answer.
Sorry for asking it. I should have known better. I understand.
Stall and delay. Don't send the attorney that can answer questions.
Are you familiar with the Willard Drysdale debacle and the Army Corps of Engineers just north of Kellogg?
I am really not.
Okay, well, that site was a 400-acre piece of land that was a farm. And the Army Corps wanted to put dredge sand on it. And Willard did not want to sell his farm because he'd owned it for a long time and it was his land. Just like Doug here owns his chunk of land. And so they had a real brouhaha. And after about 500 people showed up at the public hearing in Wabasha County in the eminent domain struggle, the Army Corps of Engineers, because of the obvious citizenry rejection of the proposal, did not pursue the eminent domain for this farm. But that had nothing to do with the DNR per se, but it was between the Corps of Engineers and the landowner. And I don't see how the DNR can be in this battle either, because it's basically the same thing. And as far as that goes, this sand that the other homes along this are built on, that must have been at least partially the same thing.
Yeah, and again, I don't know a lot of details about the Drysdale, scenario. What little I do was that was a planning effort to identify additional sites. And that those sites identified were, upland sites rather than riverine sites. And so I think that's the distinction I would maybe identify here, is that, because those were upland sites, whether they went forward or not, they would not have been DNR, public waters jurisdictional in any way, shape, or form, whereas this situation is.
Any other questions that we have for him now? Got to stick with the basic questions of getting answers here. Lynn?
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all this. And the stuff we were emailed is a little different than what's in the packet. I'm wondering if we can get some maps up on the screen. And one of them is a Minnesota DNR flood inundation map on page 44, figure 15. Is there any way we can show that up on the big screen? There's a blue arrow across the river that I'm trying to make sense of, but it's the Stanton property and it's kind of around the curve of the river. Is there any way we can pop that up or? I think it's.
But, oh, yeah.
And Commissioner Ward, you'd raised a question that I hadn't answered, I believe, regarding, Homer and several other of the placement sites. To my knowledge, this is one of the few properties that the Army Corps of Engineers does not fee title own, but had a lease for. And they have, very intentionally, quite a while ago, but I couldn't tell you exactly when, moved away from that lease model towards only full acquisition. And that ties back to the Drysdale, question as well, is that properties where they had intended to do acquisition for placement to avoid
They don't have to mess
this
with
type
us.
of a scenario.
It's theirs. They don't have to mess with us little governments. It's the
Mhm.
federal government. Thank you, though. Yes, you're right.
Any other questions? Lynn?
Yeah,
Okay.
we got the map up
Yep.
now.
What is that little blue arrow?
What's that blue arrow on the left side? Can you read the?
That says flow and is pointing down river.
Okay, and then on the right, it's kind of a expanded of the actual Stanton property. But aren't there houses like in real close proximity to the proposed site?
Up there a ways.
So, on the area shown, there are not to my knowledge. So. And this is material that was put together by Mr. Stanton's consultant.
Any other questions? Lynn, did you get an answer there?
Yeah, but the actual figure of the Minnesota DNR map.
That's utilizing the online lake and flood elevations online LFIO, we like acronyms, tool that helps, show and disseminate the information to the public. So that was the tool he used to create this figure in the document.
And it sounds like the Federal Emergency Management Act is what actually declares what is flood zone, floodway.
Correct. Working with the state and local government units, FEMA does make the National Flood Insurance Program maps.
Because the previous figure page talks about the flood insurance rate map published by FEMA.
Yep. Those are the flood maps. We call them firms.
Okay, and it says there, maybe, I don't know, it says there is no regulatory floodway identified on this map.
The 1984 firm that you're showing, that you're viewing here, has just a general floodplain district. And a general floodplain district is treated more conservatively until additional information is provided to help delineate out what area is floodway versus flood fringe. And now we are moving towards, when they become available, a map that will have a designated floodway and flood fringe.
Provided by FEMA.
Correct. And then adopted locally.
Thank you for that clarification.
Questions? Anybody else have any questions for him?
Well, I think you,
This land has changed hands several times over the years, but according to what you sent us in your letter, at least from your attorney, that they needed a special permit to change hands. Have they ever gotten that permit then? Public waters permit?
could you identify where in the letter you're,
Minnesota statutes, page 3. Minnesota statutes 13G.245 prohibits any person, private or public corporation, or any government unit of the state from construction, reconstruction, transfer of ownership of, or making any change in, without first obtaining the public waters work permit. So how could he buy this property if you are covering this without that public waters work permit?
What page are you on, Mark?
72, it's page 72, the DNR's authority to regulate the fill on the site. The first, it's a Minnesota statute, and then the second one it prohibits the change, and, but it's that one there that they can't even transfer ownership without a public waters work permit. And how could he buy it without that public waters work permit? And how could the person ahead of him buy it? And how could the person ahead of him buy it if you're actually in charge? You know, if the DNR is in charge of this, how can they buy and sell this property without that permit?
that is a good question. I feel like I need to defer to our attorney to answer that. I'm not prepared to answer that.
Because I didn't, I mean, it's,
Yeah, it says right there.
yeah, so the
Plus
question I come up with is, well, if they didn't need a permit for that, maybe you're just overreaching your authority by saying you have control over it, but it's obvious over 50 years of history, if they've never gotten this waters work permit to transfer ownership, I don't know. I just found that really,
You would have thought that would
Interesting.
have been recorded.
oh, absolutely.
That type. Where's Bob Baminick when you need him?
Well, it's,
Well, that's
but if
what
they
I asked
never
about an
issued it.
abstract. That's what you look
But-
on the abstract, read it, this lease about it would be
Yeah, but
defined if it's no one
that
void.
lease doesn't make any difference, anything. Any other questions for him? That's my only question. When I was reading all this information, which I wish we would get the information a little earlier. I don't like reading things and trying to figure it out the day before the meeting. That is the second year in a row that DNR has done that. And it's very not nice to us people to try to have us cram it all in the last minute.
Yep, and, I do, definitely hear that, that comment. We certainly strive to provide information well in advance. I do think that, this, the timeliness of things speaks to the complexity, of this particular scenario. And we'll definitely try to, as we always do, provide information well in advance.
Any other questions for the DNR guy?
Well,
If
thank you
not,
for the
thank you.
opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, what are your wishes, folks?
Stephanie.
Stephanie? What if I don't call on her?
Then she can't.
I bet she'll trump you.
Okay, probably. is.
I will be quick. I share your frustration about getting things last minute. I've spent the majority of today digging into some of the things that were raised, and I wanted to share some of the concerns I had as well, because I think that they weren't touched on quite clearly. One is that the, I not Wow, not talking loud enough for you?
We wanted to hear that.
So as you noted, the biggest issue here is whether or not this is floodway versus flood fringe. And the FEMA map is incorporated by your zoning ordinance. So the ordinance that was adopted says that if it's floodway, you cannot build a dwelling there. That's the critical factor here. If it's floodway, it's not allowed. If it's flood fringe, you can. So that's why that designation is so important. The problem we're running into is that, at least from what I was able to put together today, the zoning ordinance relies on the FEMA map to say what's floodway and what isn't. And as of right now, in my reading of what we have in front of us, they say it's floodway. And so that means it's not even a permitted use. It's not a conditional use. We can't issue a conditional use permit for something that's not a conditional use in the floodway district. So if you look at the zoning ordinance, you have your floodplain district, and within it, it breaks it into 3 subsets. There's floodway, flood fringe, and general, and it would fall within the floodway, which doesn't allow for it. So that's a problem that I see. But I also, again, I haven't had as much time as would have been nice to dig in on this issue. I did note, and I've spent a lot of time today also reading the federal regulations, which I don't get a lot of time to do usually. So I think there is a route for that to be changed. It's essentially like getting a rezoning something, only you have to do it with FEMA. So that's where that letter of map revision would come in. If they got the letter of map revision to say this is flood fringe, then we would be able to permit it as requested, because it would be flood fringe and not floodway. So, but that's again, only a preliminary review. There may be something I'm missing given the short timelines, but that's what I was able to dig out on those short times.
Question.
Yes.
Can we put that as a condition?
So my problem is that it's not a conditional use. You can only issue conditional use permits for conditional uses. If it's not a conditional use in the floodway district, within the floodplain district overlay, you can't even issue the conditional use permit. And that's, again, I only found that probably a couple hours before the meeting. I was only able to talk to Eric shortly before the meeting as I was digging into it. It might be worth pushing this out to next month to see if we can figure out anything further in depth. But given the timelines,
Okay. But question.
Is there any way that somebody can get this new,
get a hold of the maps so you can actually see them?
no, this new information that's supposedly supposed to replace, what is it, 2002?
So the updates to the FEMA maps?
Yeah. Because, I mean, we're discussing how the DNR stalled off on
Isn't it?
putting this
That information.
in front of us, but
That's what I've been doing for a year.
But aren't they?
Isn't it the same? Isn't it the same? Isn't
Next
it
week. Or no.
no, just wait a minute.
you'll have to wait.
We'll get to it.
We'll get-
So my understanding is that the new maps, the ones that are under review for discussion, still designate this as floodway. That it's, potentially could be changed within that, but at this current point, it's designated as floodway, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
So the letter of map rezoning, is that something the county would request? It'd have to be the individual landowner?
I believe so. But again, I've had a day. So I can't fully guarantee that everything I've got is exactly right on this. But given my initial review, that's what I saw, is that there's a concern that because it's floodway, it's not a conditional use.
Okay, anybody? Arlie?
Stephanie, what is your suggestion for Doug? I mean, he's been through hoops for the last
I know.
year.
And it looks like a perfect spot. I'm not his attorney. I can't provide him with legal advice. He has an attorney. I actually know his attorney, so
I put a tent up on weekends.
but I'm just struggling at this point with whether or not we can allow it, given the way that our zoning ordinance currently handles floodway versus flood fringe and the reliance on the FEMA map.
So he's, me and Marcia were looking, he's paying taxes on recreational building and that. So if he's not allowed to put a building down there, his tax should be virtually nothing.
That's the assessor's job. I don't know how that works.
Well, it's dropped.
Yeah, I don't know how tax assessment works. I wish it worked a little nicer so that I didn't have to pay as many taxes.
Everybody pays something.
Yep.
Darling.
Mike,
So-
you have a question?
I'd like to have Mr. Stanek address this. I know that his engineer and them had to work on the floodway versus the flood.
Okay, anything else for Stephanie while she's still up here?
No, I don't.
All right. Come back up, and give us your name and address and
My name is Douglas Stanton, 30323 Wildlife Haven Road, Winona, Minnesota, 55987. So may I just address Stephanie is spot on. You cannot issue a permit in a floodway in front of you people, and I don't expect you to know this, but is every piece of information hydrology wise to clarify the map. Hence the LOMAR, which is in the last sentence of the DNR's letter to us. So we asked in the very beginning, can we make this floodway issue very clear, because nobody has defined it in 70 years. The people who worked on this used to run the ship at the DNR. They're privateers now. So they said, here, we'll clear up this little area for you and make sure that we give you, in those hydrology ports, give you all the information for you to remove it from floodway and make it flood fringe. She's perfectly right. You can't do it. We're getting back. So that last sentence in their letter to you is, you need to get a LOMAR. And, oh, by the way, because we have jurisdiction over the waterway, we need to sign off on it, which is what Mr. Youngsmith just told you people 10 minutes ago, and we ain't gonna do that. Read the last page of their letter, and basically it all boils down to, all the hydrology work you've done, we agree with. It's not in the floodway. The maps say they are, but your hydrology work, we agree with 100%. It had to be the original island. They shot the elevation in their historical documents to allow placement of sand on that island. I didn't shoot that elevation. The DNR did, to issue the Corps of Engineers. So if you read through all that, everything on there, we've done everything they've done. Folks, I'm jumping off into the weeds, like you said earlier. Not many people have rerouted a river. The entity I used to own, Borton Construction in La Crosse, Wisconsin, developed and created Three Rivers Plaza adjacent to the La Crosse River. I rerouted the river utilizing Wisconsin DNR, FEMA, the city of La Crosse, their map amendments, same thing. It takes, and Mr. Youngsma can attest to this from where he came from, it may take another 30 years to get clarification on a map amendment with FEMA. So we have went out, did FEMA's job, paid to do that, ran it up the chain at DNR, and somewhere it hit a obstacle. Why, I do not know. That is what's so perplexed to me. I have been in business for 30 years, and as long as everybody did documentation, investigation, and brought proof to the table, but in the very last sentence of their letter, it simply says, you need a LOMAR, and we need to sign off on it, and we ain't doing it. It's in front of you.
So a question,
Okay.
Doug, have you, and again, we have no power over DNR, just like you don't, have you?
But they
approached-
don't have any jurisdiction.
No,
They're
have
just
you
making
approached-
comments.
Right, right, it's lawyer language and.
I understand lawyer language.
So, yeah, are you willing to, how much are you willing to fight? But have you approached state legislators to push your issue with the DNR, like Senator Miller or Representative Plowski?
No.
Okay.
And
I don't know what,
can I elaborate on that?
yes, please, sure.
The reason I haven't is because the DNR to you in both meetings are simply making suggestions and comments. That's it. That's all they're doing. This is what we suggest. They have no jurisdiction, only in waterway. And they're simply saying, we're looking at a map from FEMA that's not well defined enough, correct? Only because it's like a map of the world and we didn't get zeroed in on this little piece right here. And Mike Flynn brought up this, if it's truly in a floodway, wouldn't the sand be gone?
Well, one of the factors is, will you have to, will you self-insure this property or will you have to take out insurance?
No, I don't need it. I can self-insure it. Hence the reason and request initially of a conditional use with conditions.
Because if you don't need insurance, then you don't have to hassle with, you know.
Yeah, if everybody really thinks smart, Corps of Engineers, they'd get together with FEMA, raise BFE, which is base flood elevation, and so everybody wasn't required to have flood insurance, and simply let the channel from top of Minnesota all the way to the Gulf of Mexico and just raise the elevation of the main channel by 1.5 feet by changing the BFE, and they'd be able to quit dredging. That's way too much common sense.
There's other problems with what they're doing up here. They're gonna have a hard time maintaining a 9-foot channel because of all the crap coming out of Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's,
I mean,
there's more,
that's an issue beyond.
but that's
All right,
it,
we're
that's
getting
sidetrack.
out
So
in the weeds again, but
Yep.
apparently, no matter what we do, we can't correct Stephanie.
I may have a thought.
well, may I
may have.
May I ask you a question? Or, I mean, we're both up here together, I guess, at this point. So basically, and quick, Stephanie, I apologize.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. 1 year ago, I was asked to go and get the information, which I don't expect these people to do or understand. I'm not saying nothing bad, don't get me wrong, but we've produced the hydrology work, and the DNR in their letter is agreeing with the hydrology work, which is clarifying FEMA's map, which takes it out of floodway, which allows you to go, okay, you can get a conditional use because the DNR agreed that you're not in floodway anymore, but we should get a LOMAR, but the DNR is saying, oh, that's our last trump card. We need to sign off on the LOMAR and we ain't doing it. End of story. That's about as plain as I can put it, folks.
I have a thought.
Go ahead.
Let's hear the.
Okay. And I don't know, again, I haven't done the research. I would like time to really
just
see
looked
if
at the
if this is a valid option. Our zoning ordinance adopted the FEMA map as an official control. We have the authority to amend official controls through the same process that we do zoning ordinance amendments. We could potentially, and I'd have to verify this, we could potentially go in and say this piece is fringe versus floodway.
Because of the work he's already done and his official.
Potentially, yes. It is something we could look into as an option, as a path on this. Again, it was just something that popped into my head. Eric and I were talking a little bit, and I don't know for sure that it would work. But it's something we could look into as an option.
Would it take a motion to get the ball rolling on that?
I would suggest, and I hate to do it, tabling it till next month to give me the time to research to see if that's a valid route toward, or if there are valid routes to get to the point where a conditional use permit could be issued on the site, and verify whatever we can, and then we could have a motion to initiate that as a possibility.
Are we unable to issue a permit to build on less than 40 acres still?
So,
You've got 42 acres in the spec state. You've got 43 places.
but the application says 28. 26? The application says 26.
We need to clarify that.
So that, yeah, there's a,
Refund on
There's a
Is there
question.
Is there two different, parcels?
It all listed it, you know, what I can see here quickly is
Just
one.
one.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know why it would be two
Doug, how
different?
much is it?
One is a 43 acres?
I was
or
told when I
46?
purchased it, it was 28-acre site.
Okay.
Okay, but if you go home and look at your
Paying
tax
taxes on
statement.
43.
Like 43 point.
Like I'm gonna win that argument either.
Might be surplus.
Well,
Oh, okay, yeah,
Hey, Eugene,
Doug, are you willing to
let us work on this one.
put it off for another month and see what we can find out, or you want us to just keep grinding away here?
Is that an official question?
I don't know. Is it Mark or Stephanie?
If you want me to answer what you just asked, I don't have a problem putting it off. It's easy to go to war when you ain't got nothing to lose. But my point is, as long as everybody, is that all right? I guess I'm still, my name and I was up here.
Yep.
So my biggest concern is that I know I get wound up and I apologize, but
It's okay.
my point is everything is in front of you that I supplied that clarifies this. And they, in their letter, they agree with our clarification points. So basically, we've put a microscope on this little piece of ground and said, this is why it is not floodway. Period. You, as an entity, have the ability to have Stephanie and Eric go, yep, here's the information. It's done by a legitimate firm. Here's the letter that corresponds with that. Now, is everybody, once you get another 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, then go, now that everybody understands it, because nobody wants to make a decision when they're going, So if I got to wait another month, 2 months, so be it.
Well,
But man, it's getting
right
close
now-
to sunfishing time.
right now, I mean, Stephanie says we can't do anything because we can't even
You can, if you,
do it because we cannot do it if it's in floodway and it's.
you're
in floodway.
misunderstanding this, Mark, and I apologize.
No, I get what you say, but officially,
Officially,
it's in floodway. So if we can move it out of,
yep. And that's the information that you can do that with.
right, so theoretically,
Figure that out.
theoretically.
But I don't think you can do it tonight. I
Right.
think
No,
that
you
we
cannot.
have a
You,
Public hearing. on-
you need to have a Lomar.
I
No.
think we've got some
I don't think
potential
we need a
options to look
Lomar.
into about being able to get to where we'd like to be able to approve something like this as a conditional use. We don't have the information, the research on how to do it correctly at this point.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's gonna be 1 month or two to get this all.
Well,
sorted out.
I make a motion that we table this until Stephanie gets to the bottom of this pit and says that we can
We want to get to the
do
I
top.
don't.
one
Yeah,
way or
thanks,
the
Doug.
other and then bring it back.
But we can go down and fish and we can go down and
Yeah.
throw your.
Any
beach
other
balls.
Got my awning
questions,
turned off.
comments?
And there wouldn't be any extra charge on
No,
that part
No.
by tabling.
No, other
we're just
than
kicking it down the road.
kicking it down the road.
We're just like the federal government.
Yeah, he's not getting any younger. I can see that. So, you know, he'd probably like to enjoy this place he gets there if he gets it there.
Like the baby, so. Yeah.
Okay, Eugene made the motion.
Second.
Arlie seconded it. Any other discussion?
Can we,
Jordan?
can we limit that tabling to a month or two in any way?
Yeah, how do we decide? 1 month or two?
Well, if we can't, if we can make the change, do we have to meet again and then put it off for 30 days to make a public hearing?
I will have an update for you at the next meeting on what the options are and then we can proceed. Likely take more than that.
Yeah,
to do
it's,
it, but we'll at least tell you what
Especially
the
if we have to
options are.
change the map.
Okay.
And there's always a chance that it's not an option. but
well, if it's not an option, then we don't have a lot of, you know, we're trying
We'll look
everything we
into
can.
options and then see if we can get to where you'd like to go.
Okay,
Stephanie, am I correct in thinking that we're looking at two separate decision pathways here? One is Winona County's decision pathway, whether or not to approve a CUP. The other, entirely separate and beyond our ability to influence, is the DNR's decision on what to do if.
I believe it's really, yeah, there's a couple pathways. FEMA is involved in this because my understanding on all this is FEMA's the one that sets the map, and the letter of map revision would be dependent on the DNR's weighing in, and they're not going to support that. So that's an issue when it comes to the mapping by FEMA. For our perspective, we have the conditional use permit before you and possibly a route through amending our official controls. But it's something we'll have to look into. So there's kind of 3 routes. And then if we do issue a conditional use permit, there's still the statute, I believe, that says you can't build on fill. And that we have no control over. And there's a chance that that could be pursued by entities other than us if we issue the permit and he decides to build. So that's something else that would have to be factored in.
Thank you.
Any other questions, concerns? Anybody? If not, all in favor of, well, did we ask, the applicant is okay with that? What Stephanie just said, it's not going to be 30 days, it's going to be 60 or 90. Are you okay with?
If I can make one clarification to
Okay.
Stephanie.
Make one clarification.
But we would not be building on fill.
And if the DNR thinks you are, they can challenge that.
I understand. Hence the reason for the historical document that dictates that the material is designated permanent. That is, I just needed to,
Sure.
because then
It's important.
yes, it's extremely important. It's a permanent site for beneficial reuse. And the
That's-
Corps of Engineers channel navigation has an entire paragraph on residential dwellings utilizing beneficial fill.
Okay, thank you. All right,
I'm good for,
there's a motion and a second to table this for Stephanie for an update in the upcoming months. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All righty, it's tabled. And Stephanie's got her work cut out for her in the future.
Sorry.
All righty, back to,
We take a quick break.
we can take a quick break.
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
we-
5-minute break, please,
5-minute break.
before we come up with the next one. that comes off. the
Oh,
politicians
if you
would
bought
spend
that, it was commercial.
Well, the
It was a
big thing
fish
is what we should do is we should be
for
getting
years and
payolas from the
years.
Chinese and the Russians and the
Uh,
Ukrainians and everybody else.
If you
Put it in
spend
our
on
oil and
anything
run the money around a half a
that
dozen
land is
times.
worth something.
And that's how we get rich. We politically
There's no
elected and
way.
then we let the Chinese
But if
run
you
our
look
government. so we
historically,
can't use
That
cars.
land has had stuff on it since the beginning.
It's something so funny that I saw a thing
Where he's
from,
talking about
this
building
was,
that used to
this
be
is the
high.
government, this was
And
the,
that was filled in and back. If you go back 400 years ago,
anyway.
the river.
They were saying that they
So
thought
I'm
all
not
this
so
COVID
sure
money would have run out.
that pile where the
And it
trees are
took some of the
is
highest
all
people in
drifts.
the government to figure out that,
It's sand.
well, all this
But
COVID
not
money,
in the
you
bond.
spent it with
Right.
him. Now he's spending it
Like
with
they're-
him,
And
now
if
he's
you look at
spending it
the
with him. He said,
floodway,
they thought this money
the
was gonna
river flow,
disappear.
Person Highland.
The multiplying effect is
It's a
adding into the
multiplying
economy.
effect, and they said that's what's screwing up the whole inflation thing is the fact that, and it's like, really?
What was that?
You guys are running the
45?
country and you just figured that out now.
Yeah, you probably right.
Well, you know.
Anyway, call the meeting back to order. 5 minutes are over with.
There it is.
Petition.
Do we need Stephanie?
So, yeah, you-
Oh,
She's okay.
Well, that's it.
I think this one's gonna be an easy
She's
one.
out of the block, so.
why don't you just sit in her chair for a while and
And they know all that.
See, where's that in this?
Okay.
9, 10.
petitions docket PC 05-18-2301 to consider the petition of Wilbert and Carol Ebert, Douglas Bosley and Laura Felly to build a new residential building site in agriculture resource conservation district on less than required acreage. Olivia.
Good evening. So an overview of the site location for the proposed conditional use permit. It is located in New Hartford Township, Section 9. It's located along Stair Drive. It would be the southern portion of the current parcel. So the current parcel is outlined in red. They'd be splitting off what's south of Stair Drive currently. This is a site plan that the applicant created and submitted with the project. The project was submitted with co-petitioners, so the current property owners as well as the potential purchasers. So you can see they have their access drive there in the dark red, along with the dwelling, and then there would be a shared well with the dwelling to the east.
That's another owner. I mean, that's a different, totally different party where the shared well is.
Correct. Yep. Yep. So this is another site plan that staff created. The new dwelling would be on the 20-acre parcel, and then we highlighted what the approximate boundaries would be of that new parcel. Some of the site considerations, it is proposed in an established approximately 7.8 acre prairie area that is enrolled in the CRP program. They're proposing to take a small portion of the CRP land and use it for their building site, and then would maintain the rest of that prairie as is. It is an earth sheltered home design, so you have some details of that in your packet. So they're designing it to fit in with the landscape that's currently on site. These are some site photos from the site visit. Here you're looking west on Stair Drive towards the driveway entrance. You can see the stakes are circled in red there on the photo. This would be looking southeast towards the driveway entrance, and the dwelling you can see in the larger photo there is where the shared well would be. This would be looking south towards the building site from where the driveway is being proposed. And then this would be looking northeast at that same building site. New Hartford Township did hear the petitioner on April 13th. They indicated no comments regarding the request when they submitted the township acknowledgement form to us. Our recommendation would be that you consider all materials and testimony before making findings that support your decision. Our analysis and draft findings support granting the petition as a CUP. And should you decide to approve the petition, staff have drafted 4 conditions for consideration that are included in your packets.
And with that, does anyone have any questions for me? Both the property owner and the petitioner are online as well.
I have one question. Do we have any information on the well? How old it is, how deep it is?
I do not know, but I know that the dwelling to the east was permitted as a CUP within the last 2-3 years.
Jordan?
That was my question, if the property to the east was the one we had approved previously.
I don't go back on, it's a dead end road, so I don't drive back in it.
Any other questions? Lydia? Okay,
Thank you.
all right, online, who's in charge of that? There we go. Petitioner, would you like to speak? One of you, please.
Yes, please.
State your name and address, and then just tell us what your plan is there.
My name is Douglas Bosley. My address is 4824 Washington Avenue, Unit C1 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, 48108. And our plan is to purchase the 20-acre split off from the Eberts property and use it as a primary residence. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, anybody have any questions for him? Anybody? Okay, guess no one has any questions for you. Would any one of the Eberts like to have a comment? Say anything? No?
Oh, you gotta get them clicked on.
Yeah, you're muted.
I'll figure it out.
Well, if he wants to say something.
Can't hear you.
Oh, you're still
We can
muted.
hear him a little bit.
Oh, is
No,
Rose gonna
he's
say
still got
something?
his microphone.
I think his wife is
I
coming.
got it. I got it.
Coming to the.
He's got it.
Oh, he's-
I get a little nervous.
Get woman handle like that too.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I'd like to talk about sand.
Name and address, please.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. The
Gotta give
gentleman.
your name and address first, please.
Oh, okay. My name is Bill Ebert, 42798 Stair Drive, Dakota, Minnesota, 55925. And just want to say that we've met these folks and we trust them implicitly to do whatever they need to do, and we will help them in any way we can.
Okay, thank you. Marcia?
But Mr. Ebert, you don't control the well, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so you have nothing to do with the well.
No,
Okay, great. Your property is on a separate system.
right. It's on the 40 acres across the road.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions for him? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Public hearing, anyone interested?
I'll make a
I
motion.
make a motion that we open the public hearing for docket number 2.
Eugene,
one.
Eugene made the public hearing and Jordan seconded it. All in favor of opening the public hearing, say aye. Public hearing is now open. If anyone wishes to speak for or against a petition, please step forward, state your name and address and what you would like to say. Anyone else online except for those three? Me, Chris, nobody else? If anyone wishes to speak for or against a petition, please step forward or online. Speak up. State your name and address and what you'd like to say. For the third and final time, if anyone wishes to speak for or against a petition, please step forward, state your name and address and what you'd like to say.
I make a motion to close public hearing.
Harley made the motion to close the public hearing and Louis seconded. All in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is now closed.
I guess knowing what we know, I think, there's not a big problem with it. I think we should allow the CUP.
Is that a motion or is that just a conversation?
All the above. It's a motion
Okay,
with
conditionals and
And
findings of facts? Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. There's a motion and a second to approve. I guess if I had a question or anything, it would be if he's going with a ground house and he's got plenty of acreage, why he wouldn't put solar panels up and live off the grid?
He might.
It sounds like
Maybe
he
he
is
might,
trying
huh?
to be as much energy independent as he can.
Yeah, I
but
read-
yeah, he's
yeah.
got power. I wondered about that too.
Because he's got a lot of, acreage there. He could have it covered with solar panels.
Well, the problem is
Yeah,
it's my
CRP.
energy and you are more restricted now as to what
Yeah.
size you
Well,
can put
but
up.
you still can put up enough for yourself.
For yourself.
Right, but the
Yeah,
I
rules and
know,
laws have
I know,
changed.
I know.
That kind of limits
Yeah,
in a way.
the
So-
investment isn't as lucrative as it was.
Yeah.
My question is would it be appropriate for us to attach a condition regarding the well and like an easement for the well? Or would that all be handled?
It's already in there.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Is it?
I think it's between the parties to arrange the well and how they want to do it, their percentage. Obviously, they're not going anywhere without a well. In fact, I think it's a good idea to utilize multiple residents in one well.
Absolutely.
Why drill another hole in the earth? And they'll have to work that out. Same way if they want to put panels up.
Any other discussion? So you're happy with what?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay,
Is
if,
there any, I'm sorry, we haven't, I don't know if I've ever approved a earth home. Are there any other, I mean, that's up to the builder and
You got it.
their prerogative.
We're not in the building business here.
Yeah, we don't enforce,
It's his fault.
we don't enforce building code or
No.
anything like that.
There's some of them already.
Oh, they're pretty much on the high point of the hill.
No,
Look very detailed.
Yeah, I know, but, okay, I just as a
Not
any
part of
other
our-
discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving with the conditions and findings of fact, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Okay, motion is approved. The next thing will be at June 19th at 9 AM, but it'll probably be at the condition, June 13th at 9 AM.
June 13th? Okay.
Tuesday, June 13th at 9 AM in front of the county commissioners. Will it be part of the?
We'll see what Bethany puts together.
The consent agenda?
It is, but there's always the prerogative to pull it off the consent.
So that's the next time that it will be in front of the committee. It will be Tuesday in front of the county board, Tuesday, June 13th at 9 AM. Thank you. Any other business to be brought forth at this meeting?
Yeah, I would like council to explain or comment before this meeting about the dog kennel thing.
So the county board elected to acknowledge the the recommendation that the planning commission made, but they are still going to pursue the possibility of amending the zoning ordinance. What we are expecting that to look like, as Commissioner Ward said, probably not in the near future, given staffing, but what we're expecting that to look like is a working session at the county board level to discuss what it is that they want, if anything, what that would look like, potentially have them approve or propose language that would then come back to the planning commission for public hearing based on our zoning ordinance and how amending it works. But it's not going to come back to you to figure out what to do with it. It would have to be specific language they would send back to you just based on the way things are expected to play out. So kind of like, remember what happened with silica sand, where the actual language amendment started at the county board, and they said, planning commission, have a public hearing on this and make a recommendation on this. It'll operate the same way if they come up with language and an amendment that they want. And then you'll follow through with the zoning ordinance, what it says as far as reviewing it, holding the public hearing, making a recommendation, and then it'll go back to the county board for their final decision.
An applicant comes up between that, where does that leave us?
You'll process it the same as any other conditional use permit.
Current rules.
Yep.
Nothing's changed.
Will we have to take the recommendations from the county board as such, take it or leave it, or can we amend them positions?
Just like any other zoning ordinance amendment, you'll have language that'll be heard, and then there will be a public hearing on it. Following that public hearing, you can recommend it, you can recommend approval of it, you can recommend denial of it, or you can recommend approval with modification.
Like with conditions, right?
Kind of. Yep. We'll make sure the language is appropriate for whatever it is you want to do, as far as your recommendation goes. So at least that's what I expect. And we may go through a working session and they may decide not to pursue an ordinance amendment. They just want to get a feel for that process and how that would actually, what it would look like and what options there are, and have that discussion.
It'd be very diplomatic.
They can choose not to pursue a zoning ordinance amendment. So they can do that. Any other questions on that or what that would look like?
Well, I do have, someone's coming to mind. How do you, and the word has been put out there, ban or deny when previous rules in the most recent applications have been approved? And we had testimony, we looked at the record, we looked at the reports. There hasn't been a reason to change something. It's just because I don't like it. And you said in the training, it's just because I don't like it doesn't mean I can change it.
If the final decision was to remove dog kennels as a conditional use or interim use within our zoning ordinance, there would likely have to be a basis for it. There would have to be findings made as far as why that would happen.
And you can't use just because I don't like it.
Not usually.
Gotta use facts.
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
So we'll have the law out
I'll
there.
sleep better tonight knowing.
Good. We will have the legal backing for whatever final decision does come out.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Anything else to be brought forth this meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion of adjourn, Mike made the motion and Jordan seconded. All in favor of adjourning, say aye. Meeting is adjourned.